Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Pesachim 1 week at a time. And today is our 16th shiur. We actually have only 2 more weeks left of Masachet Pesachim, if you can believe it. You have all learned over 100 dapim, so kol hakavod to everybody. Today our shiur is going to cover this past week's daf, which is daf 102, Kuf Bet, through 108, which is Kuf Chet, which was today's daf. And I have a number of charts and pictures for you today. So let us begin with daf 102. Now, if you remember last week, we discussed making different blessings based on our meal. When we sit together at a table, we have created a meal, and therefore, one does not need in general to make more blessings, more brachot, after they've been sitting at a table. But what happens, we discussed last week on Daf 101, what happens when we leave the table? And here, just to remind us, so we have an option where if nobody remained at the table, then you need to make a bracha achrona, meaning a blessing that is at the end of the meal, before you leave. And when you return, you make a new blessing, a new bracha. However, if someone stayed at the table, then you do not need to make a bracha achrona. You do not need to finish off your meal before leaving. And then when you return, it's as if you never left and you continue eating. And this is why some people have the custom that, let's say, you're in the middle, you finish your one course. It shouldn't be that every single person at the table gets up to clear the table, right? There's something about one person should be sitting at the table at all times. Again, it does not have to be the same person, but there should be someone at the table at all times in order to, again, because of this daf, in order to signify we have not finished our meal, we are still continuing. And we'll talk more about what the meals were like in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, I would say really at the end of this shiur. So we will pick this up again at the end. So let's continue on Daf 102. There is a discussion that maybe it's not about the person sitting at the table, but maybe it's based on what type of food you were eating. If it would require you to make the bracha achrona, the blessing at the end, in the same place, then you know that you're going to be coming back because you have to return to make that blessing, and therefore you would not need to make a blessing in the middle. Okay, the Gemara continues and talks about a meal on Friday afternoon. What happens if on Friday afternoon you were eating and now it becomes Shabbat, or as you see here, right? It's early afternoon, either on Erev Shabbat, meaning on Friday, or Erev Pesach, meaning it's the day of Pesach being at night. So now you're eating your meal, and now it becomes again either Shabbat or Pesach. The question is, when, if do you need to take a break? Hafsaka, here at the top of this picture, hafsaka means a break. Again, I didn't mention it at the beginning, these charts are actually from a website called Daf HaChaim. He's very clear and very organized, so you can check him out. So here we're talking about, do you need to make a break or not? And Rabbi Yehuda says as soon as it becomes Shabbat, you need to interrupt the meal. You need to make Kiddush and then Birkat HaMazon. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you continue eating as long as you want, and then you make Birkat Hamazon, right, the grace after the meal, and then you make Kiddush. Again, just to remind us, we discussed this a little bit last week, that the concept of what we called pores mapa, where you take a break, you pause your meal, you either cover your food or you move it away, and then you can make kiddush, then you continue the meal, and then you do birkat hamazon. So that is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, no, 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 you don't have to stop. Continue your meal. After the meal, then you can say kiddush. Now the Gemara says, wait, hold on. Why the Gemara seems to imply that we need 2 cups of wine, one for birkat hamazon, for the grace after the meal. It's customary to do the birkat hamazon over wine. I would say most people nowadays only do that when either at an event, let's say Sheva Brachot, celebrating a wedding. There are some people, like our minhag in our custom in our house is on Shabbat. When we say Birkat Hamazon, we do use a cup of wine. So the Gemara says that when you're doing this in terms of having Kiddush and Birkat Hamazon, the Gemara says you need 2 cups of wine. And the reason is that you do not sanctify 2 things on 1 cup of wine, on one thing. And a beautiful line here in the Gemara is, we do not do mitzvot chavilot chavilot. A chavilah is a bundle, right? We do not bundle together different mitzvot, meaning I think here it's a beautiful idea that every mitzvah is precious to us, and therefore we're going to do each mitzvah separately over its own cup of wine. Then the Gemara says, wait, hold on, what about Havdalah? Again, we were talking about Kiddush, now let's talk about Havdalah. So just to remind ourselves, after Shabbat, or let me take a step back, when Shabbat starts, we sanctify the day by making Kiddush over a cup of wine. At the end of Shabbat, we want to bid farewell to the Shabbat, and we have the custom of making Havdalah. And we're going to get into all the components of Havdalah in a minute. One of the components is over a cup of wine. Now, says the Gemara, what if I was eating what's called either shalashudis or Suda Shlishit, or the 3rd meal of the day, which is an afternoon meal on Shabbat afternoon, and now it's starting to get dark. Now let's say I only have 1 cup of wine. How do I do Havdalah and Birkat Hamazon and the grace after the meal? So the Gemara says that if I only have 1 cup of wine, it's okay. I can make Birkat Hamazon and Havdalah on 1 cup. Now, hold on. Remember, a minute ago we just said I cannot do Kiddush and Havdalah on 1 cup of wine, but now it seems that I can make Havdalah and Birkat Hamazon on 1 cup of wine. So the Gemara says, oh, no, no, no. That's only if I don't have enough wine. If I only have enough wine for 1 cup, so then I could do it together. And now we get into, I think, a fascinating discussion about what does Havdalah look like when it is made into going into a festival. And this is really perfect because in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we are going to actually be doing this. What does that mean? In 2 weeks is going to be Shabbat. And then right after Shabbat, we're going to go right into the festival of Pesach. So on Saturday night.
Okay, I'm listening.
Whoops. On a Saturday night, we are going to be making Kiddush and Havdalah. And now we have a disagreement or a very long discussion of what is the order on Saturday night, again, of a festival, when, again, we have to make Havdalah and Kiddush. So we are going to discuss all of these ideas. Just to see, we'll go through all of the letters, but just to see that there is an argument I think I'll show you the next slide first because I think it makes it a little easier. Okay? When a holiday, a Yom Tov, falls out on Motzei Shabbat, on Saturday night, we need to use the following, okay? We have wine, yain, that's number one. We have, this is not necessarily, I mean, it is going to be the order, but we'll see. We have wine, meaning borei pri hagafen. We have Kiddush. We need to sanctify the festival. Again, it is going to be Pesach, so we need to make Kiddush for Pesach. We have Ner, which is making a blessing on the fire. Right? Generally, we do this over a torch, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is Borei Me'orei Ha'esh. Then we have Havdalah. Havdalah is the actual blessing that God makes separate. Havdalah actually means to separate. And we're going to see, we'll talk more about it in a little bit, how God makes separations. He's mavdil ben kodesh lechol. God has separated or made a distinction between what is sanctified and what is mundane. And we'll talk about all of those things. And then the last thing here is Zman, which is the blessing of Shehechiyanu. That is made on the first day of a festival. And now the rest of this daf, meaning 102 and then into 103, is that we're going to use the first letter of each one of these blessings. So Yud, Kuf, Nun, Hey, and Zayin, which is why on the slide before, right, we're going to see the different opinions of the different orders. So you can see here Yakzana or Yaknehaz. Right, so again, each letter is going to symbolize one of these blessings, and there's going to be many different arguments. But you see, interesting here again, that each one of these opinions is saying that you can use the same cup for Kiddush. Again, the Kuf is Kiddush, and for the Hey, which is Havdalah. So again, you see that we are using one cup for two sanctities, right? We're sanctifying the new festival, and we are making Havdalah, we're saying goodbye to Shabbat. So we see here, or we seem to be proving that you can use one cup for multiple sanctifications. Again, Kiddush and Havdalah. So the Gemara says that, again, maybe this is only unique for Shabbat and for festivals. However, when we have Kiddush and Birkat HaMazon, the blessing over the grace after the meal, that is very different. Meaning, when we're talking about similar sanctifications, again, blessing the new holiday and saying goodbye to Shabbat, those are quite similar. Then you can use one cup. But when we're talking about sanctifying the day, Kiddush, and the grace after the meals, the Birkat HaMazon, those are two different mechanisms, and therefore you cannot use the same cup for both of those things. Of course, unless you only have enough wine for one cup, and then it seems that you can put them together. Okay, so now the Gemara says, again, as we mentioned, we have these 5 blessings, and there are different orders, different opinions on what we do first. And now the question is, what's the basis for the argument? You know, we're so used to, we've been learning Gemara now for quite a while. We're so used to things being different opinions. There are machlokot, there are arguments. But I think what's very important is when we learn about an argument, it's not like our 5-year-old children who like to argue just because they like to argue. Rather, we need to think about what is the philosophy behind the different opinions, right? And the Gemara at the bottom of 102 explains, right, what are we doing, right? What is more important? Do we say goodbye to Shabbat before we say hello to the new festival, right? Are we talking about chronology. Maybe we're talking about different sanctities. What is more kadosh, more holy? What is less holy? And the Gemara on the top of 103 says, right, again, that there are different orders for different things. And again, here is our machloket, Abaye and Rava. Again, yak zina or yak nehaz. Again, you can see underneath what each one is. The zayin is zman, meaning when do we say shechiyanu? Is it in the middle or is it at the end? And again, now the Gemara is trying to explain what is the reason for each order, right? So one is that, first of all, yayin, borei priagafen should go first. Why? And we have learned this before, and we will learn it again probably next week. The concept of tadir. Tadir means frequent. And there's a very famous line in the Gemara, tadir v'she'eno tadir, tadir kodem. The thing that is, let's say we have two competing ideas. Here it's blessings or brachot. If one is more common, more frequent, and the other is less common, we do what's more common first, right? We can make a borei pri hagafen multiple times a day. If you're drinking wine every day, you can make a borei pri hagafen, the blessing, every day. But Kiddush only comes once a week, most of the time, unless you have Shabbat and holidays, which we will have soon. But in general, it is less frequent. And therefore, everyone agrees, as you can see here, the Yud comes first. Everyone agrees Yayin comes first because it is the most frequent. Then we have the idea that Kiddush comes next, which is interesting because here, why would Kiddush come before Havdalah? And that is a very important question. So again, on the top of 103, we have many different opinions, right? Rav says Kiddush comes before Havdalah. Shmuel says Havdalah comes first. Levi says the wine, again, needs to be before Havdalah. And then the Chachamim say, no, let's do the regular order of Kiddush, right? Again, Ner and Havdalah is the normal order of Havdalah. And let's put Kiddush first before that. Interestingly, another idea, there's a beautiful idea on 103 that talks about a king who is leaving and a minister that is coming in, right? First, you escort the king out, and then you bring in the minister. Though, interestingly enough, that is not the halacha. The halacha, as you can see here at the bottom, the halacha is yak nehaz, which is a famous concept, right? Yak nehaz. That is what we're going to be doing. So again, yain kiddush, we're actually going to say hello first to Pesach, and then we're going to say goodbye to Shabbat, right? So we're going to do yain kiddush, then ner over the light, then havdalah, and then Shechianu is going to come at the end. So that is what we're going to do. Interestingly enough, you can see there is something missing. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but those of you who are familiar with Havdalah in general, what is missing? So Besamim is missing. Borei, exactly. Borei mine Besamim, the smell. Interestingly enough, we say, why do we make a blessing over something sweet to smell on Saturday night? Because there's a concept that on Shabbat we have what's called the neshama yitera, a second soul, a second spirit that is special for Shabbat, and that leaves us on Saturday night. So in order for us to not be too sad, we breathe in something that's good smelling to make us feel like, oh, okay, that's going to help us get over missing that second soul or that second spirit. Since on Saturday night, if it's going to be a holiday, we're still in this, I would say, sanctified space. Therefore, we do not need besamim. We're still sanctified, maybe we still have our neshama yetera, and therefore you do not need besamim. So for those of you in 2.5 weeks, you'll remember yak nehaz. That is what we're going to be doing when we go into Pesach. Okay, let's continue on 103. Rava, and now we have like a numerous stories of different opinions of different people, different practices yes, it's interesting what is logical, Adam. Like what do we see as a logical order and what isn't? So it is interesting that we actually go according to Rava and not Abaye. So here, let's get to a story, right? Rava made the bracha on Kiddush, and then again on Birkat Hamazon. And again, the question was why? And he said that if you don't know if there's going to be wine, so then you're going to repeatedly make another blessing because you don't know if there's more wine coming. But let's say you decide that you're going to say, this is now, we're leaving the idea of Havdalah. Now we're talking about being in a regular meal. Let's say if you decide you're going to say Birkat Hamazon, that kind of ends my meal. And then if you want to drink more, you need to make a new bracha. You need to make a new blessing on whatever you're going to drink if you want to drink afterwards. Again, so we said that with Kiddush and Havdalah, you can have 1 cup, but with Birkat Hamazon in the middle, again, you're deciding to end the meal, and therefore you would need to make another blessing afterwards. Now let's just talk about the ner for a minute, the candle. Rava's attendant lit a torch from a lamp. Again, just to remind ourselves, in the time of the Gemara, a lamp meant, that a clay lamp that has oil in it with 1 wick. That's a lamp. A torch is something that has more than 1 wick. And Rava's attendant lit this torch for Havdalah. And from here we get the idea that for Havdalah, when we light a candle, it should have more than 1 wick, which is why Havdalah candles are generally braided with multiple wicks. The idea is we want to end Shabbat with a very strong light, and therefore we use the torch or a Havdalah candle after Shabbat. Okay, now let's go back to Havdalah. So Rava said, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and more than that, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi only said, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol. And then the Gemara asked, why did Rava say so much? It seems that there was an idea that Havdalah should either have 3 different separations, meaning God separates through only like 3 things, or 7. That seems to be what they would say. On the top of 104, it seems that Rava said 4, and we just said it's either 3 or 7, and we said no. The last one is similar to the conclusion of the blessing, and therefore it doesn't count, and therefore it's only 3. And from here we learn that when you make a blessing, a bracha, you need to have what's called a chatima, something that ends the blessing, that kind of gives us like a summary of what we just said, right? It's usually either similar to the conclusion or it's similar to the opening, to the beginning of the blessing. And from here, right, we have a gufa. The Gemara says, let's try to understand what we say for Havdalah. Again, I think it's fascinating to think about we're used to when we want to say Havdalah, we open up the prayer book, we open up the bencher, we read Havdalah, right? There's a form, a system. But in the time of the Gemara, as you can see here, different rabbis were saying different things. And each one was trying to understand what is the best way to make Havdalah. So again, there seems to be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5. And we only make Havdalah when we're going from a higher sanctity to a lower sanctity. So this is just very important, right? Because when we go from Shabbat to a Yom Tov, to a festival, we are going to make Havdalah. But when we go from a festival to a Shabbat, right? Let's say Pesach would have been Thursday night, Friday, and then Friday night is Shabbat. We do not make Havdalah because we're going up in sanctity, right? We're going from a festival to Shabbat. The idea here is that Shabbat is a higher sanctity. But again, we're going to make Havdalah from, let's say, Shabbat to a weekday, from a festival to a weekday, from a festival to a Chol HaMoed, right? So again, as long as we're going down in sanctity, we are going to make Havdalah. And here the Gemara explains to us that when we make Havdalah, there are a number of options of things you can say, right? When did God make a distinction between different things? And I thought this was just beautiful to think about, right? So we say, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol. God separated between what was sanctified and what was chol, meaning mundane, right? Ben or lechoshech. That's taking us all the way back to the creation of the world and the beginning of the creation. God made a division, a separation between light and dark, right? Ben Yisrael le'amim, right? The Jewish people are different than the rest of the nations. There is a separation, a division. Ben Yom HaShvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh, right? The Shabbat has a different sanctity than the rest of the week. Ben tameh l'tahor, between things that are pure and things that are impure. Now, we don't usually say this on our Havdalah. Ben yam l'charava, right? God separated between the sea and the land. Ben maim elyonim lamaim tachtonim, right? Again, back to creation. God separated from the upper waters, meaning like rain and clouds or something other than that, to the lower waters, the seas and the oceans. Ben Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, right? God separated between different groups within the Jewish people. And then Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael. So we have a total of 7. Again, now there's a machloket, an argument of a disagreement on how we end Havdalah, right? Is it Mekadesh Yisrael, that God sanctifies Israel, the Jewish people, or Hamavdil bin Kodesh Lechol, right? And maybe we should say both, or maybe just one. And then they said, like, let's go see how different sages end their Havdalah. From here, on Daf 104, the Gemara now gives us a concise kind of summary on what brachot or blessings, what is their structure, right? So the Gemara says that all brachot start with a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, and then they end with a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, as like a summary. However, we have exceptions, right? Except for brachot, right? There are some that are very short, right? So here you can see here, right? A bracha, if it's short or only has 1 point, so then it opens with Baruch, but it doesn't end, right? So think about when I make a blessing on a cup of water. So I make 1 bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, shakol niyeh bidvaro. That's it, short. Right, or bracha on al netilat yadayim, on a mitzvah, right? Al achilat matzah. Those are called short brachot, and they only open with a bracha, and they don't end with a bracha. Now, if it's a long bracha, like if there's like a paragraph, then if it has only 1 point, right? Well, let's say if it's long or it has many points, so then it opens with a bracha and ends with, right? It opens with Baruch and ends with Baruch. So I can, right? The Gemara sends us to the brachot of Shema. If you look in the morning when we say the brachot on Shema, some of them start with Baruch, some of them only end with Baruch, and some have both. So it's interesting just to think about what that means, right? But if there is a request or a sanctification in the paragraph, so we need a blessing to end the paragraph. And then again, if it's a continuation of a blessing from before, it doesn't have to open with Baruch, but it does have to end. So it kind of like is like a bookend. So this is just a nice slide to give us that idea. Okay, let's move on to 105. On 105, the Gemara talks about, again, on Friday during the day, we have a meal. And then we talked about stopping, right? So they said, like, let's stop the meal if it's Shabbat, and then we'll start with a new meal. And then they said, no, you don't need to stop. You can just continue eating, and you do not need to stop. So Rav actually said that eating on Shabbat is considered what's called keva, an official real meal, and therefore you cannot eat food that wasn't tithed, and you don't need to take away the tables. You just need to do pores mapa, which is what we mentioned before. You take a break, you make Kiddush, and then you can continue. Again, maybe it's the same thing with Havdalah, that while you're eating, you don't need to stop, but you can't start eating till you make Havdalah, right? Again, you can start your third meal of the day, Sudah Shlishit. You can start it before it gets dark, but once it gets dark, you can no longer begin your meal, but you can continue your meal. So let's say you have, a lot of company, or you want to sing. You can keep going well into the time that you're supposed to make Havdalah. When you finish, you say Birkat Hamazon, and then you make Havdalah. Rav Huna says that you can't even drink water till you make Havdalah, meaning as soon as you make Birkat Hamazon and you finish your meal, that's it. And now you cannot eat till you make Havdalah. Rabbanan, the sages say you cannot eat, but you can drink. Okay, what happens if you didn't make Kiddush on Friday night? Let's say you fell asleep, you weren't feeling well. Now you wake up on Shabbat morning. Can you make Kiddush during the day? Now, again, let's not get confused. We're not talking about making the daytime Kiddush in the day. We're asking, can I make the Friday night Kiddush during the day, right? And now the Gemara also asks, if I didn't make Havdalah, can I make it during the week? Right, and the Gemara says maybe I can learn Kiddush from Havdalah, right? Then if I can make Havdalah well into the week, then maybe I can make Kiddush well into the day. So the Gemara says that on Friday night or on a festival, you can make Kiddush on wine, and then we mention again that it's the holiday or Shabbat in Birkat Hamazon, and during the day, we don't make the Friday night Kiddush, but we do mention the holiday in Birkat Hamazon. But you can, right? So it seems that you can make the Friday night Kiddush. If you didn't make it, you can make it during the day. Again, it's not a preferred way of making Kiddush, but it is what's called bidi eved. It is, if we need to, then it would be okay. And therefore, again, right, the Gemara has a nice concept, which is chaviva mitzvah b'sha'ata, right? It's good to do the mitzvah when I'm supposed to do the mitzvah, right? It's better to make Friday night Kiddush on Friday. We don't want to push it off to Shabbat, right? The same thing with Havdalah. We want to make Havdalah on Saturday night. We don't want to push it off. However, if circumstances require it, you can push it off, and we'll see how far you can push it off. Again, interestingly, we want to make Kiddush as early as possible because, again, we want to show that Shabbat is precious, and therefore we want to bring it in as early as possible. However, Havdalah, we want to kind of push off as long as possible, again, within limits. We still want to do it on Saturday night. But again, here the Gemara says on 105, we learned 8 things here. That even though you said Hamavdil in Mariv, meaning in the Saturday night prayer, we do say the Havdalah blessing. We still need to make Havdalah afterwards. And you need to use wine, and it needs to be a certain amount of wine, which again we'll talk about a little bit later. And once you drink from it, it's called a kos pagum. It's like flawed. So let's say if you make kiddush on wine, you can all drink from it, but you shouldn't make another kiddush on that same wine. I see a question. So if you do Friday night's kiddush on Yom Shabbat, wondering when you would say the kiddush of the Yom. So I think you would not make the kiddush of the daytime. If you are making the Friday night kiddush during the day, I think that's it for that day. And again, at the top of 106, we're going to say that if you ate before Havdalah, you could still make Havdalah. Okay. Okay. No, the top of 106 talks about, again, this idea of pagum, that if you drink from it, it becomes kind of flawed, and you cannot make kiddush on the same cup of wine. Okay, one second. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niheh bidbaro. Speaking of making bracha, okay. Daf 106 talks about where do we get the idea that we make kiddush at all, right? Because it says zachor et yom haShabbat lekadsho, right? We have to remember the day of Shabbat and sanctify it, right? So we remember. How do we remember Shabbat? That has to be over wine. But what's interesting, it says yom, zachor et yom. Yom means the day. So the Gemara says, no, it means the beginning of the day, which is the night, right? And therefore, when do we sanctify the day of Shabbat? That is on Friday night. But of course, there is also the kiddush that we say during the day. And here the Gemara says that if you forgot to make Havdalah, you can actually say it through Tuesday. And I thought this was a great representation because, we always think of the week as, let's say, Sunday, I don't know, however you think about it, like Sunday to Shabbat, or Shabbat to Sunday, or Monday through Sunday. But interestingly here, right, if you think about Shabbat in the middle, right, the Gemara says, and this is in the context of if you're writing up a contract, specifically a divorce, a get. So it says if the person said, I'm going to divorce you after Shabbat, he has till Tuesday, meaning Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is called after Shabbat, right? But if he says, I'm going to divorce you before Shabbat, that's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's just interesting. I guess right from here, we get the idea. You can say, right, Shavua Tov, have a good week, till Tuesday, right? Every at the end of this shiur, I always say Shavua Tov, right? But now I see that I could do that, right? And on Wednesday, you can start saying you should have a Shabbat Shalom, right? So that's where this comes from. So here we see that you can make Havdalah if you forget till Tuesday night, meaning up until including Tuesday. The Gemara then continues and talks about washing your hands for hamotzi, and then if you can make kiddush or not. Some see it as an interruption. Others, if any of you know somebody from the German, I would say custom, yekim, they actually have a custom to wash netilat yadayim and then make kiddush and then make hamotzi. They put it all together. So that's actually discussed over here. 107 discusses that you can you shouldn't eat before you make kiddush, but if you did, it's okay, and you can still make kiddush. The same thing with Havdalah. You shouldn't eat before you make Havdalah. But if you did, it's okay. You can still make Havdalah. And we see here at the top of 107, there is an opinion you have till Wednesday, but there's also an opinion that you only have till Sunday. But the truth is, we say you have through Tuesday, you can still make Havdalah. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about the different substances that you can use to make Havdalah. Now, we know, and as we mentioned before, that you should make Havdalah on wine or grape juice, right? Something that's made from grapes. That is seen definitely in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara as the highest level of drink, right? It seems to be the most precious, and therefore you should use wine or grape juice for Havdalah. What about other substances? So here we have a story about a Meimar who went to a certain place and they gave him beer. Now it's interesting to note that when the Gemara talks about beer, when it says shechar or shichra, it means beer made out of dates, date beer, not the beer that we are familiar with, which is made out of barley. That is a higher quality of beer. But in the time of the Gemara, they made a date beer, which was seen as a very, I don't know if it's weak or cheap. We'll see in a minute that it's also seen as very not healthy. And therefore, a Meimar would not use it for Havdalah. So they brought it to him and he said, I'm not making Havdalah. And he made Havdalah the next day on wine. And then he came the year after and they brought it to him again. And he says, oh, I see that date beer in your area is what's called chamar or chomer medina, meaning this is your local drink, right? We know that when you go to different places, they have what's popular, the local drink. And it seems from this Gemara that you can make Havdalah on beverages that are seen as, I guess, important or have some sort of status in your area, right? So if you don't have wine, you can use beer. If you don't have beer, I remember growing up, once my father made Havdalah on orange juice because that's what we had. So you are allowed to use different substances. You may not use water. As much as we know that water is healthy, even though the truth is in the time of the Gemara, they thought it wasn't. But even though we know that water is an amazing, beautiful, pure thing, you may not use it for Havdalah because it is seen as a lower level beverage. But other things can be used. Okay, so again, the Gemara says, can you make Havdalah on this date beer? It seems to be a machloket. Most of the sages say you can't, and you should use something that is better. And here there's a story that they brought one of the sages, again, this date beer, and he said, oh, it tastes so good, for sure you can use it. That night, unfortunately, he got very, very sick. The commentators say that he actually got diarrhea from it, and then he says, oh, forget it. I don't care how good it tasted. If you're going to get sick from something, you cannot use that beverage as a means to sanctify or to make a blessing or to praise God. And therefore, he says, don't drink it, not only for Kiddush or Havdalah, but you shouldn't drink it at all. Again, the importance of our intestinal health is important, and therefore they said you shouldn't even drink it at all. So that was interesting. How much wine do you need to drink whenever we're making a blessing, whether it's Havdalah or Kiddush? The Gemara says you need melo lugmo, a cheekful. So I guess it could be subjective, but the idea is if you take a teeny tiny sip, that's really not enough. You should really take, I guess my parents would call it a shluck. You should take like a big sip, and that is the minimum that you need in order to fulfill your obligation. Okay, from here, I don't know if you remember, but last week we started the perek discussing not eating right before or right Erev Pesach, right? Not eating the day when the nighttime is going to be Pesach. And with the Mishnah says you have to stop eating samuch lemincha. That means close to the time of mincha. Mincha is the afternoon prayer. And now we have a discussion. Which afternoon prayer? Now, we only have one afternoon prayer, but there are two time periods that we could be referring to. One is called mincha gdola, the big mincha, and the other is called mincha ktana, which is the small mincha. So now let's go back to just reminding ourselves of the hours. Just to remind ourselves, in the Jewish law, we take the day from sunrise to sunset, we divide it by 12, right? There are 12 hours in a day, right? Day as opposed to night. There are also 12 hours of the night. The middle, the 6th hour, is what's called chatzot, or midday. That's 6. And then, right, anything from 6 to 12 would be the afternoon. From 0 to 6 would be the morning. We remember we talked about it at the beginning of the Masechet. When do we stop eating chametz? Now, of course, it's relevant because it's going to be in 2 weeks, right? Remember we talked about stopping to eat on the 4th hour, having to burn it by the 5th or 6th hour, right? So these things are all going to be practical for us in a few weeks. But now we're talking about when do you need to stop eating or stop having a meal on the night, on the day of Pesach, meaning Erev Pesach. So what are our time periods? So samuch lemincha gdola is at 6.5 hours, right? That's half an hour after midday, so that's 6.5. Samuch is going to be, what does it mean, close to? It means half an hour before. So if we're going to talk about the big mincha, then we're going to have to stop eating at noon. If we're talking about mincha ktana, that's at 9.5 hours. So again, if midday is 6, 3.5 hours after that is 9.5 hours. Therefore, you would have to stop at, again, the 9th hour, which would be 3 p.m. Now, don't get nervous. It doesn't mean you can't eat anything after either 12 or 3. We're going to see in a minute what it means. So let's go back to our Gemara. So again, which Gemara which mincha is it, the Gdola or the Ktana? Now, the question is why? What are we concerned about? So we're going to see that each one is going to be concerned about something else. As I mentioned before, when I have a machloket, when I have an argument, I want to understand what's the meaning behind it. Why is that your opinion, right? So if the opinion is that you have to stop by noon, it has nothing to do with what's going to happen at Seder, right? Because I can eat at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and still be hungry for dinner, right? So then the Gemara explains, I'm going to be concerned that I don't want you to forget to bring your Korban Pesach. Remember, we said you can bring your Korban Pesach from noon, from Chatzot. If I let you sit down to a big meal, right, and you're like, oh, I know Seder night, we don't eat till 9 o'clock at night, I better eat a big meal. If you sit down at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of the day, let's say you're going to eat and eat and eat and eat, and you're going to forget to bring your Korban Pesach. So that's the problem. That's what we're concerned about. Therefore, we say, stop eating, bring your Korban Pesach, and then we'll talk. The other option is mincha ktana, which is later, right, which would be 3 p.m. And here, what are we concerned about? We're concerned that you should have an appetite for the night. Again, we're going to have a mitzvah to eat matzah, and we want to make sure that when you eat that matzah, you're hungry. As we all know, when you're not hungry, that is not enjoyable eating. And we want to make sure, right? It's interesting to think about. I actually have a commandment to eat something. So the Gemara is explaining to us that if I have a mitzvah to eat something, I better do it when I'm hungry, when I have an appetite. And this way I will enjoy it to its fullest. And therefore, we want to make sure you don't eat too close to the Seder, lest you go into Seder night being very full. However, don't worry, says the Gemara, you could still have a snack before or after these hours, meaning at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you could still have a snack. We actually have a custom to have a little like snack before we light, like 2 hours before we're going to light candles so that the kids are not starving when you get to Seder, even though it doesn't help because you're always starving when you get to Seder. But okay, it's a mitzvah, so that's good. Okay, the Gemara at the bottom of 107 says that if you snack a little bit, that's actually going to whet your appetite. It's going to make you even hungrier, right? And therefore, interestingly enough, that's one reason why we have the karpas. We dip, which we'll talk about more next week. We dip the karpas into the salt water. One of the things is we're going to whet our appetite for the matzah, which is coming. Other reasons we'll discuss next week. Drinking wine. The Gemara says that if you drink wine, that also whets your appetite. It doesn't fill you up. It actually makes you hungry. And therefore, it's okay to drink wine before we're going to eat the matzah. Okay, we're now going to go to 108. And 108 describes Rav Sheshet, who would fast the whole day because he wanted to make sure that he was going to be hungry. And the Gemara says, don't take any cues from Rav Sheshet. He was very finicky. He was very careful about all the things that he would eat. If he ate a little bit, he would be full the rest of the day. So that's not something that applies to most people. So don't worry. You don't have to fast. You should eat. Okay. Now we are going to talk about reclining. There is a custom that one should recline at the Seder. I brought you some pictures. I don't think that we're really going to do this, but close enough. Actually, we have a custom to have at least the beginning of the Seder in our living room, on couches, on mattresses. The kids sit on the floor, on pillows, to kind of simulate this reclining. So let's learn about it, and then I'll show you some more pictures. Right, so the Gemara on 108 says, even a poor person needs to recline. Again, what's the idea of reclining? It is a symbol of freedom, right? I'm going to lie back and enjoy my meal, right? That is a way to symbolize freedom. We're going to talk about it in a second, but let's read through a little bit in the Gemara, right? So the Gemara says that when you're eating matzah, you need to recline, but when you're eating maror, you don't. Again, matzah is the symbol of freedom. Maror is the symbol of the slavery. When we're remembering the slavery, we're going to sit uncomfortably at the table or straight up. When we're symbolizing freedom, we're going to recline, we're going to lay down, we're going to be more comfortable. What about when we're drinking the wine? So now the Gemara is asking, right, what is the symbol? What does wine symbolize? Matzah is very clear. Maror is very clear. But what about the wine? So now we get into a beautiful discussion about the 4 cups, and we'll do more about this next week. But we, again, just to remind us, we have 4 cups of wine that we have at Seder, right? 4 cups of wine. The first one is at Kiddush. We're going to sanctify the day. The second one is over Magid, meaning when we tell the story of the Exodus, it's over a cup of wine. Remember, again, the cup of wine makes it important. Then that's cup 1 and 2. Then we're going to eat. Cup 3 is Birkat HaMazon, as we mentioned before. When we're saying the grace after the meal, we're going to have a cup of wine. The last cup, the 4th cup, is over Hallel, when we praise God. So those are the 4 cups. And now we have a fascinating discussion, right? The Gemara says, right, that there's a distinction between the first 2 cups and the last 2 cups. And some say that the first 2 cups you need to be reclined, and the others say it's the last 2 cups that you need to be reclining. And the question is why, right? And they say, let's think about it. The first 2 cups talk about the process of freedom, right? We say, avadim hayinu, we were slaves, but now we are going to be free, and we go through the whole process. So one opinion is the first two cups you should recline because we're talking about the process of freedom. The last two cups, you're already free, so you don't need to recline. I don't need to kind of visualize that freedom because you've already been freed. That's one opinion. The other opinion is pretty much the exact opposite. The first two cups, we're actually talking about the slavery. How could you recline when we're talking about slavery, right? Rather, you should sit up straight because the beginning of Magid is talking about the slavery. The last two cups, that is the celebration of the freedom, and therefore you should recline in the last two cups. And the Gemara concludes, you know what? Let's recline on all four cups. And I read a beautiful idea by Rav Ezra Bick, and he says, again, what's the purpose, what's the idea behind this machloket, this argument? And he says, what are we celebrating on Pesach? Are we celebrating the process of freedom, meaning which starts off talking about slavery and the bitterness and ending in freedom, right? And the redemption? Or are we talking about actual freedom, meaning not the process, but the actual freedom, right? And he says that the answer is both, right? The Gemara concludes that we're celebrating both of those things, meaning we have to recognize that it's not only about the idea, the concept of being free, but it's about the process of freeing ourselves, right? Or of God freeing us, right? That redemptive process has value, right? And we're going to celebrate both of those things. So that's just, I thought, a beautiful idea to think about for our Seder, right? What's something that we want to celebrate, right? What do we want to free ourselves from? So we'll talk more about that, I think, next week, but this is the beginning of that. Okay, the Gemara continues and talks about how one should properly recline. You shouldn't, don't go to sleep, right? Don't lie down on your back. You should not lie on your right side. Again, that is seen as very dangerous because of the way you swallow. You should recline on your left side. Now we get into a discussion about women. Should women recline, right? They are not completely free. They are under the dominion of their husbands. Don't worry, the Gemara says no. Women, right, important women are allowed to recline, right? Nashim chashuvot. They are allowed to recline, and the Gemara says that all women of Israel are important, and therefore you should recline, and you are important. Don't worry. A son can recline even when he's with his father, right? Again, this idea here, the Gemara talks about different relationships, right? A father and a son, a husband and a wife, a student and a teacher, right? If I am in fear of that person, or if that person has control over me, do I recline or not? The answer is yes, you still recline. Right, even the waiter who's serving still reclines. And here I just want to share with you two pictures. My friend Shuli Mishkin is a tour guide, and she actually wrote an article in the website Hadran, and she wrote an article about leaning in the Greek and Roman culture. So you can see here, not very clothed, but the people reclining here. This is what it looked like. Here is the servant or the slave who is serving, and the tables here in front. He's placing the food there, and the people are reclining. And she wrote a really nice article that described that even in the old city, this is from the Herodian quarter. You can see here there's a mosaic. And on the three sides, the mosaic is kind of empty because there were these like lounge chairs or sofas that were put in a like a chet shape, in a U shape. It's called a triclinium, I think. I think I said that right. Right, like it's three, like reclining, right? So it's like three couches. And you can see here in the picture, these are, oh, thank you. You can see here are the tables that they would bring in front of the couches. And that was the table that we talked about that was brought with food already on it, right? What I would call like the TV tables. I had those growing up, right? So they had them in a fancy way, like these are like marble, or here's another one at the side. So you can see here, they actually found these things archaeologically in the time of I think it's Beit Sheni of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, from here, we move on to the 4 cups of wine. We're finishing up in a minute. And here, the Gemara says that women, again, for all the women listening to the shir, women are also obligated to drink 4 cups of wine. The very famous comment, we've had this before, right? Af hen hayu ba'oto hanes. The women were also involved in the miracle. There are 2 explanations for what that means. Either that they were also redeemed, or it means that they facilitated the redemption, right? Either way, the women are involved, and therefore they need to drink the 4 cups of wine. Here the Gemara finishes up talking about how wine was made in the time of the Gemara. There was this wine concentrate, and the way you did it was you diluted it with water, and the Gemara talks about it being 3 parts water to 1 part wine. So you needed a revi'it, a quarter of a revi'it of concentrated wine to 3 parts of water, which will give you revi'it alug, meaning that is the amount of wine that you need to drink. So with that, we will continue more about wine next week. We will talk more about the Seder next week, the 1st cup, the 2nd cup, Manishtana, very, very exciting. Wait, I see a question. How you will change what you do this year to enter Pesach from Shabbat? Lisa, in terms of what? What's the question? Change what? We do have many different changes, but what did you mean, Lisa?
Well, I mean, the one I can remember from 2008 is that we're going to sell out all our chametz, save 2 tiny loaves of bread, and eat them out on the back porch Friday night. But just the whole preparation, we won't be cooking on Shabbat. We do need to store stuff. This particular way that the Chag falls always just gets into my head. And I'm just curious whether you have a way you think about entering this practically. I'm asking you a very practical question.
Okay, excellent. So I'll give you a quick synopsis of a practical law for this year. So this year is different, as you mentioned, because we have Shabbat before Pesach, and therefore, bdikat chametz, the searching for the chametz, is going to be done on Thursday night.
Yes.
Exactly. Then Friday morning, you are going to burn your remaining chametz. However, you are going to set aside whatever loaves of bread, challah, that you are going to use for Shabbat. So I'll say for our house, we are going to have 2 small loaves of challah for Friday night. And we are going to have 2 small loaves of challah on Shabbat. So I'm going to put aside 4 small loaves of bread in a bag. Everything else I'm going to get rid of in my house. I'm going to cook for Shabbat as if it's Pesach, because I can't switch over my kitchen on Shabbat. Right. And therefore, I'm going to cook. Shabbat is going to be like Pesach. However, you cannot use matzah on Shabbat, because the idea is that matzah needs to be special on Pesach, and therefore you cannot use matzah for Shabbat. So therefore, I'm going to keep those 2 loaves of bread or 4 aside. I'm going to, like you mentioned, on Shabbat day, I might make hamotzi outside so as to not have any crumbs in my house. I'm going to make sure I finish all those, right?
Yes.
Don't buy any big challah, make small ones, finish them all up. And then in terms of the meals, right, we have a custom to have what's called Suda Shlishit, that third meal of the day. That is not going to be late in the afternoon, exactly because of our Gemara from this week, because we're not allowed to have a meal so late in the afternoon. And therefore, I'll tell you what we're going to do after the morning prayers, after Shacharit, we're going to make Kiddush. And instead of having, normally you have like some cake at Kiddush, we're going to wash and make Kiddush early. In Israel, it's very early, like at 10. In America, it's probably 11 or 11:30. We're going to have one meal. It might be, I have to decide what I'm going to do. I'll probably do something dairy, something small. So some cake or cereal and milk or something small. We're going to bench and then maybe relax, play a game. And then in an hour, I'm going to have lunch. So I'm going to have and that's going to be my third meal. And I'll do that probably, I haven't thought about it, but like at 12 or at 1 or something like that. And then have like a big, I'll have like a big meat meal. And again, as we mentioned, you can snack later on in the day, but you shouldn't have a big meal. So that is what we are going to do. I hope that answers your question.
It is helpful because in 2008, we screwed up. We had too much challah. We'd sold it. You can't burn it. And then we owned stuff. I mean, it was a nightmare.
Right. Right. So this year you have to really think small. 2 little challah rolls. Whatever is your custom, but the smaller the better. Exactly. Tell the family there's a lot to eat. The challah, you're just getting a little piece because you don't want to have any leftovers. Exactly. Exactly.
Nightmare.
Yes,
This is what
pita
makes us
also.
smart. This is what makes us smart. So many details. Thank you.
Exactly. It all comes down to the details and to planning. So definitely, you do not need to, you don't really need to rinse your mouth after eating challah before you eat. Again, the food on Shabbat, it's not really, I guess you're right. I guess maybe drink something because you're eating with your forks and your knives that are Pesach. So you're right. So I guess, yes, your dishes that you're eating on Shabbat are your Pesach dishes or disposable, but I'm not getting into
That's why we're going
ecological
to do it outside. That's why we're going
Right.
to do outside. We'll have an appetizer outside to clean our mouths out, and that'll be paper, and then we'll hit the dining room. This I learned last time.
Exactly.
But Saturday early lunch, that's a good idea.
Exactly.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. And again, if anybody has any questions, you can always email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And looking forward to our continued learning. And what did we say? Tuesday, so Shavua Tov. And Shabbat Shalom, because it's almost Wednesday. And we'll see you next week, everyone.
All right.